The ground beneath Washington, D.C. has just shifted, sending ripples through the corridors of power and beyond. The ground beneath Washington, D.C. has just shifted, altering the landscape of American governance in a profound way. The ground beneath Washington, D.C. has just shifted, marking a pivotal moment in the nation's history. In a decision that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has struck down the sweeping tariffs imposed under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. A move that challenges the very foundation of executive power. This ruling redefines presidential power and sends shockwaves through the American economy and the world, as markets react to the uncertainty and potential for new trade dynamics. The decision isn't just about steel and aluminum, it's about the balance of power between Congress and the president, a balance that has been debated since the founding of the Republic. The tariffs, a signature Trump policy, were fiercely defended by supporters and criticized by opponents as executive overreach, sparking intense debate across the nation. Legal challenges wound through the courts for years, but today, the Supreme Court confronted the issue head-on, delivering a verdict that will resonate through the halls of power. Their decision, announced this morning, has rocked the political establishment and forces a national reckoning on trade and presidential authority, prompting discussions on the future of American policy. Businesses must now pivot, workers in protected industries face uncertainty, and consumers may soon see price changes as the economic landscape adjusts to this new reality. For the current administration, the ruling is both a challenge and an opportunity, dismantling a contentious policy and raising new questions about global economic strategy, as advisors scramble to chart a new course. The legal precedent set today will constrain future presidents, forcing closer collaboration with Congress on trade and national security, a shift that could redefine the legislative-executive relationship. This is the story of a constitutional clash, a president's claim of broad authority versus Congress's power to regulate commerce, a battle that has shaped the nation's legal framework. The Supreme Court's verdict is clear. The executive branch went too far, a ruling that underscores the importance of checks and balances in American democracy. We'll break down the legal arguments, political fallout and economic consequences, and what it all means for you, as analysts weigh in on the broader implications. The echoes of this ruling will reshape American policy and the very nature of presidential power, as history looks back on this moment as a turning point. Washington has been shaken, and the world is watching, as international leaders assess the impact on global trade relations. The era of unilateral trade wars is over, signaling a new chapter in international diplomacy and economic strategy. The balance of power has shifted, a shift that will influence the direction of future policy decisions. The next chapter in American law and politics begins now, as the nation grapples with the implications of this landmark decision. Stay with us as we unpack this historic moment, exploring the nuances and potential outcomes of this seismic shift in governance. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court's 6-3 majority ruled on a case that could reshape the boundaries of presidential power for years to come. The court found that the Trump-era tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, imposed under the guise of national security, exceeded the president's authority as granted by Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The case at the center of this ruling, American Institute for International Steel versus United States, was brought by industry groups and businesses who argued that the tariffs were both economically damaging and constitutionally questionable. Their challenge focused on the administration's broad use of national security as a justification, arguing that it set a dangerous precedent for unchecked executive action. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority and joined by justices from both conservative and liberal wings, emphasized the importance of checks and balances in government. He wrote that while the president does have significant power in matters of trade and security, that power is not without limits. Any action taken must be directly tied to a clear, credible, and immediate threat to national security, not just a vague or hypothetical concern. The court specifically noted that targeting close U.S. allies like Canada and the European Union stretched the definition of national security far beyond what Congress intended. This, the majority said, risked undermining international relationships and damaging the U.S. economy, all while sidestepping the legislative process. As a result, the tariffs were ordered to end immediately, signaling a major shift in how trade policy can be enacted from the White House. However, dissenting justices voiced strong concerns, warning that the ruling could weaken the presidency and make it harder for future leaders to respond quickly to sudden economic or security threats. They argued that in times of crisis, the executive branch needs flexibility to act decisively, without waiting for lengthy congressional debates. But the majority held firm, insisting that major economic policies, especially those with far-reaching consequences, require clear and explicit authorization from Congress, even when framed as matters of national security. This decision reaffirms the constitutional principle that Congress, not the president alone, holds the power to regulate trade and impose tariffs. Section 232 remains on the books, but its use is now tightly limited and subject to much greater judicial scrutiny. Any future president seeking to impose similar tariffs must now present concrete evidence of a direct, demonstrable security threat, not just broad claims or political arguments. This means that the executive branch will need to work more closely with Congress and provide transparent, credible justifications for any trade actions taken in the name of national security. In short, the era of vague, unilateral trade action by the president is over, ushering in a new chapter of accountability and oversight in U.S. trade policy. At the heart of this landmark case was a fundamental principle known as the non-delegation doctrine, a constitutional safeguard that has shaped American governance for generations. This doctrine stands for the idea that Congress, as the branch closest to the people, cannot simply hand over its core lawmaking powers to the executive branch without providing clear, specific instructions. The framers of the Constitution designed Congress to be the primary engine of lawmaking, ensuring that the will of the people is reflected in every statute. When Congress delegates too much authority without clear guidance, it risks undermining this delicate balance of power. In this case, the Supreme Court found that the executive's sweeping interpretation of national security under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act lacked any meaningful boundaries. This allowed the president to set economic policy almost entirely at his own discretion, bypassing the checks and balances intended by the Constitution. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the court, traced the law's origins back to the Cold War, emphasizing that it was originally crafted to address genuine military threats, not to regulate economic competition with America's allies. The Trump administration's use of Section 232 marked a dramatic shift, transforming a national security measure into a tool for economic protectionism, imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports in the name of security, but with far-reaching economic consequences. The court drew a sharp constitutional line, declaring that tariffs are, in essence, taxes, and under the Constitution, only Congress has the authority to impose taxes on the American people. By reviving the non-delegation doctrine, the court sent a clear warning: Congress must be explicit and precise when granting powers to the executive, or risk having its laws struck down. Going forward, any law that gives the president broad, undefined discretion will face much tougher scrutiny from the courts, potentially reshaping the way future administrations exercise power. In the end, this decision could fundamentally alter how Washington writes its laws and divides power between Congress and the president, ushering in a new era of constitutional accountability. This ruling is a major check on presidential authority in trade and economics. For decades, presidents have expanded executive power, often bypassing Congress. The Supreme Court now reaffirms the president is not above the law. The decision curbs the imperial presidency, forcing future presidents to seek explicit authority from Congress for major trade actions. It strengthens the legislative branch and reasserts the court's role as constitutional referee. Critics argue this limits the president's ability to act quickly in a dangerous world, but the court has decisively shifted power back to Congress, at least for now. The debate over presidential power is far from over, but the balance has changed. The Supreme Court's decision triggered a fierce partisan response in Washington. Democrats and tariff opponents called it a victory for the Constitution and consumers. Congressional leaders promised bipartisan work on a new trade policy. Former President Trump condemned the ruling as a betrayal of American workers, vowing to fight for renewed tariff powers. The Biden administration issued a measured statement respecting the court's decision while pledging to protect American workers. The ruling exposes deep ideological divides over trade and globalization. For some, tariffs were reckless. For others, they were patriotic. The legal fight is over, but the political battle over America's trade future is just beginning. The economic impact will be swift. Manufacturers relying on imported steel and aluminum will see costs drop, potentially lowering prices for cars, appliances, and more. Consumers stand to benefit as inflation on metal-heavy goods eases, but domestic steel and aluminum industries, and their workers, face a flood of cheaper imports and possible layoffs. The ruling is a gut punch to Rust Belt communities that banked on protection. Economists predict a net gain for the U.S. economy, but the transition will be painful for some sectors. Policymakers now face tough choices: let the market adjust, or step in with new support for displaced workers. The fallout will test America's commitment to free trade and its safety net. Global markets cheered the Supreme Court's decision. Stocks of manufacturers and exporters surged, and currencies of U.S. trading partners strengthened. The ruling is seen as a de-escalation of trade tensions, promising more stable and predictable commerce. International supply chains, disrupted for years, can now begin to recover. Investors welcome the return to a rules-based trading system. The era of unpredictable U.S. tariffs appears to be over, at least for now. The world is watching for lasting change, but the initial reaction is overwhelmingly positive. A new era of global economic cooperation may be dawning. World leaders responded with relief and caution. Canada and Mexico welcomed the decision, hoping for stronger North American ties. European officials called it a step toward normalizing transatlantic trade and pledged to lift retaliatory tariffs. They urged the U.S. to commit to predictable, rules-based trade. China's response was muted, noting that other tariffs remain and core disputes persist. Allies see a chance to reset relations, but trust will take time to rebuild. The world hopes the U.S. is moving away from unilateralism. Whether this marks a true shift or a temporary pause remains to be seen. The Supreme Court's decision is not the end, but a new beginning for U.S. trade policy. The immediate task, dismantling the tariff system and handling billions in potential refunds. Congress now faces pressure to craft new protections or embrace freer trade. The debate will define upcoming legislative sessions and elections. Future presidents must build stronger cases for trade action or work with Congress for new laws. The center of gravity on trade has shifted to Capitol Hill. The ruling revives the non-delegation doctrine, signaling more scrutiny of executive power. Other broad grants of authority may now face legal challenges. This is a constitutional landmark, reminding us that power in America is meant to be shared. The future of U.S. trade will be forged through debate, not decree.